We're going to start by kind of explaining how Alton was glued together from all the disparate communities it started with. The Alton we know today was at one time or another broken up into pieces that eventually became what we now know as Alton. That didn't really finally occur until 1959. This is Easton's original idea of how Alton was to be laid out. It basically extended from Henry Street to Market Street and from the river to 9th Street. If you look on this map right here, this white square in the center is the original plat of the city of Alton. And these will be here when you're done. When we're done here, you'll be welcome to come up and look at them. After, well, let me back up because I missed one. Actually, before Alton was settled at all, there was a settlement in Milton. The Wood River Creek bed was an area that was settled by Thomas Lippincott and some others that were a couple of grist mills and a couple of a sawmill and a whiskey distillery, and Lippincott had a store there. When they dammed up Wood River Creek, they created an environment for mosquitoes to thrive, and there was a big malaria outbreak early on, around 1818 or thereabouts, and about 30 people died all at one time, and they basically vacated the community. It just basically ceased to exist because of the unhealthy atmosphere. Easton's original plat was done and registered in 1818. He had problems almost from the beginning in proving that he had clear title to his property. At just about the same time, Russell bought the Bates Farm, which is what we now know as Hunterstown. That's the pink area here on the map. From Mr. Bates was the Revolutionary War veteran. His daughter was the daughter of Abel Moore. His daughter was married to Abel Moore, whose children were involved in the massacre. He purchased this area from Bates, and then Bates went up to Jersey County and bought what we now know as Lock Haven. He's buried under the 4th Green up there. But this area was basically bought out by Captain Hunter early on, and he and Russell sold lots there. They were not as large a lots as the original city of Alton, the ones that Easton had plotted, but he could prove clear title to his property, and so this area was settled faster than the original town was. Actually, Rufus Easton eventually had to vacate his claim to the property and made virtually no money selling lots as such. He did make some money operating the ferry, which was his original intent downtown, but he didn't do well in the real estate business here. He had other real estate holdings in Missouri as well. At about the same time that this settlement was occurring, Meacham had platted Upper Alton, and this is Old Alton, this is Upper Alton. Upper Alton is actually originally in Wood River Township. It's outside of Alton Township. The dividing line would basically be what we know now as Rock Springs. It's called Shields Branch. It extends all the way down to the river. Basically, on the west side of that was Alton, and then the east side was Upper Alton. And there were postage. I mean, there's a lot of old postage that's specifically marked Lower Alton. So we're in beautiful downtown LA, folks. You know. The rest of these areas began to fill up after Easton got out of the business. Then the property started to sell, and at that time they added the second section of the old town, which extended up past 15th Street. And slowly but surely, the rest of this was added on. At the same time the old town was platted, development had begun downtown. William Russell owned a lot of property downtown. They did donate the land from the penitentiary to the state of Illinois before 1831. So, but this area was developing, the downtown area was developing very quickly because of the riverboat trade. Meacham actually encountered some of the same problems in Upper Alton that Easton did. He couldn't provide clear title to everything he had, and it was tied up in court. And at the same time, Salut was being developed as a separate community. So again, that area was populated more quickly than Upper Alton originally was because of the property title problems that was encountered by Meacham originally. Basically from then on, it was a matter of adding one piece after another. This is the original boundaries of Alton Township, which would have been the boundaries of the municipality. Danforth Street's right here, so it would not have gone any farther than just about Danforth Street there. And again, on this end, Shields Branch, which is the creek that comes out of Rock Springs, would have been the eastern boundary of Alton. That's why the ridge area and that area was called the East End at that time, because that was the East End of Alton. Mike asked this question earlier about the specific neighborhood of Mexico. I've got no idea on that one. I don't have any idea where the name came from. It's platted here. This area here, and the property belonged to the Hunter family. So how it developed, I worked at a grocery store in that neighborhood for years, and delivered groceries all throughout that neighborhood. And we never did figure out. We asked people all the time, why Mexico? Nobody seemed to know. Ma'am.
Yes, you were talking about Easton did not have clear title.
Right.
How are the buyers able to get clear title from him?
Most of them didn't. That was the problem. He was sued by Nathaniel Pope and Nene Edwards, I think. Yeah, and that's basically his development basically stopped for about a 2 or 3 year period, and eventually he revoked his claims to that property, and Pope and Edwards ended up with most of them. There's a map I have. I don't know if you have one here, but there's a map I have at the office. It's dated 1854, and it has property owners' names on the lots. There were several people who owned a lot of property all over the place. William Russell was one. George T. Brown was one. And the other names don't come to mind right away, but there were a number of people that owned a whole block between Alton and Easton at between 15th and 16th. They'll own a block over here. Some of them were owned by companies, but the predominance of it were owned by individuals. Seth Sawyer was one. He was a lawyer here in town. You've probably all heard this before, but in the original town, the streets are named for Easton's children. It starts at Albee Street, which was his daughter. Easton Street, of course, is the next one, which is his last name, and then George, Langdon, Henry are all his sons, and Alton, of course, are his sons' names, and those are names in the original north-south streets in Alton. The two communities basically became one community, actually 3 communities, because during this entire time, North Alton was being developed as a separate community. It was called Buckend. It was also known, there was a coal seam found out by where the brickyard was. It was called Coal Branch. If you went out a little bit to the west, where the cemetery is, that area was called Greenwood, and they were sort of interchanged. People would say, oh, they lived in Greenwood, but they basically lived in that unincorporated area that we now know as Godfrey, but at that time, some of it's incorporated in Alton now, but some of that was in Godfrey, is now in Godfrey. Everything north of Delmar, of course. But in 1911, 1912, Alton and Upper Alton and North Alton all became one community. They annexed Upper Alton and North Alton into the Alton community, and it became one city. Alton was a city prior to the time. It was incorporated 175 years ago last year in 1837, and that was done because we reached a certain population size. I think it was 7,000 people or somewhere in that number range. Upper Alton didn't have quite as many people in it, but then when you add them all together, we became about 2.5 times as big as we had been. It also established basically what we know as Alton now, except again for the Milton Heights area. If you look on this map and you can, like say, get closer, this is the corporate boundary right here, and this area is what we would now consider the Milton area, and it's outside the city. That's one of the reasons why Milton Cemetery fell into such terrible disrepair after 1859 was it was orphaned. It had been the responsibility of the village of East Alton and Wood River Township, and when it became part of Alton, it became part of Alton Township, and of course the funds didn't come with the property. So it basically was neglected guys got together and cleaned it up. They performed a great service for us, because it was a mess. It was awful. Anybody got any questions at this point?
What was going on across the river? You mentioned the ferry. Was there development over there at that time, comparable development?
No. There was West Alton was developed basically as a railroad town after the bridge went in. It was called Mockins after a riverboat pilot who's buried here in our cemetery. Yeah, right. No, I'm sorry, that's not the right name. Mockins is up the road. He was a slave owner. That's where his name comes in. Basically, I think it was farmland. Right over here anyway. I think, like I said, West Alton accepted the name West Alton instead of being called what it was before, and I did come to it, but because the Burlington and Northern Railroad asked them to change it to that for their purposes. You know, at the time that Easton originally laid out the city of Alton, or his original plat, his intention was to put a ferry at the foot of Little Pisaw Creek, which runs underneath Pisaw Street. And he did that. He was in competition with Smeltzer. Smeltzer's was at the end of the ferry road, which dumps out at where the pool is now. That's basically how you got to Missouri in those days. And it was one of the advantages that Upper Alton had was that Upper Alton was up on the ridge. And there was a road that ran through basically Oakwood as we know it now. Ran across the ridge all the way to North Alton, and then you go down Choteau, down the hill, and through the ferry road to the river to get to the ferry that takes you across to the point. You walk a mile across the point, and you catch Hall's Ferry across the Missouri River. That's Hall's Ferry Road.
Anybody that's going to start from scratch have difficulty getting their time. I mean, who?
That's the essence of property management. That's why they do title search and everything.
So whose property was that to be purchased?
Well, most of these lands throughout this area were acquired by purchasing land grants that were issued to veterans of the Revolutionary War or the War of 1812. You weren't paid; they didn't have any money, so there were presidential land grants issued. When Illinois and the Northwest Territory became part of the United States after the Revolutionary War, the treaty was signed, the president issued these land grants, and they're incredibly valuable today, especially if they're actually signed by a president. A lot of them, I think they've got a couple of collections, but most of them are what they call secretarials, or signed by one of his subordinates. But a lot of the early ones were all signed by the presidents, and they're pretty neat to have. But you would buy these land grants in a block big enough to develop a piece of property, and this is where the lawsuits came in. Is Edwards and Nathaniel Pope argued that he didn't have clear title, and he must not have had too damn clear title because he lost all of it. So there had to be something to the suit to begin with, because he, like I say, he basically ended up not doing anything as far as property, not making any money as far as property development was going on. I mean, he'd already made money. He was postmaster in St. Louis and had been a judge in Louisiana Territory, so he was not less than affluent, but he didn't make any money really. He founded the city and platted the city, and then kind of disappears. He's buried over at Lindenwood College, by the way. Lindenwood College.
So, is Rufus Easton living in Illinois or Missouri at the time?
He was living in Missouri. He was only here for a short time.
He did live in the Alton area?
I live might be pushing it. I think he was here in order to conduct business a lot. And, of course, that was before packet boats, so he'd have to travel by horse from St. Louis. They'd come up Bellefontaine Road and then catch the ferry across. But there's no real record of him living here. He had 4 houses, wooden houses, built throughout his original plat in different areas, like spec homes, I think you probably want to call them now. And they were vacant, and they said a couple of them just basically stripped when somebody else built a house. So he was trying to promote the property, trying to sell a lot, but then he got involved in a lawsuit, like I say, basically he just gave up his property rights to these other guys. So they must have, like I said, I've never studied the suit, but I'm not sure, I'm not sure how far it even went, but there was a lot of this going on. I mean, there was little towns like this were being plotted all over everywhere. There was a town platted at Pipsaw Creek, right up here what we know as Lock Haven Road. It's on, this map is from the Bricks, Madison County Atlas of 1873. And there's an Illinois state map in there. Oh, the name of the community was going to be Randolph. And the streets were laid out. There were streets laid out at the foot of Clifton Terrace Hill as well. There was a community to be developed there. And those lands were acquired by the people who were doing that, mainly by the selling and buying and selling those land grants to reach the veterans. That was the primary method of obtaining property. Nobody had to retire the property here because we didn't own it before that. So all that pretty much started when Illinois became, or when Northern Northwest Territory was established in 1894. Basically, when the Underground Railroad was a place blatantly illegal. The fugitive slave law dictated that these people had to go back. If you harbored them, you were committing a crime. There were 5 guys in Missouri that were put in prison for 7 years for trying to help slaves escape. There's a book, I think it's here. There's a book about it, about their life in the prison. But at that time, and there were slaves nearby. There were 3 families who lived over on the point. The Mockins family was one. I don't recall the name of this one's going to come to me in a minute anyway. There was a gentleman who he lived in West Virginia and had a family there. He brought a black woman back here and fathered several children with her, sort of like Thomas Jefferson. And they wouldn't let his kids go to school with the other kids. Well, it's really kind of funny what he did is all the white people lived over here and all the black people lived over here and the white schools over here. So he puts the black school over here so the kids have to cross on the way back and forth to school every day. But he left the property to his black children. And his white children from West Virginia came and took it away from him. Their family is part of the Johnson family. Again, I'm losing the name here. But their family still lives in this town. And we're part of, like the Johnson family is Cyrus and Charlene, who's one of all the best historians. They live out on Wood Station Road, which was the other black settlement at the time. In the old days, the Missouri River dumped out right across from the old mouth here of Wood Creek. This wiggly line is the old creek bed. And they diverted it past what we now know where Illinois Power is. This is the new channel of Wood River Creek. But since these people couldn't read and write, when the people that were enslaved out of Missouri told them, you go to Alton, you find a big creek, and you go up the creek and you turn left. And they told stories about tying something on their left hand because they weren't taught right and left in some cases. They were afraid that they would be able to use that to escape, which in this case they actually did. If you go up Wood River Creek and turn left, you end up at Wood Station. That's the west branch of the Wood River Creek. If you go up Pipsaw Creek and turn left, you're on Rocky Fork. So it was very simple instructions. It didn't matter which one you got. They were going to be in a safe haven one way or the other. But again, the recorder's office is a great place to do research. About, I don't know, it might have been almost 10 years ago now, we found a brewery vault over here on 7th Street. When they brewed beer in the old days before refrigeration, it had to go underground to keep it cool. And they tore a house down on 7th Street, right where Brown Street dumps out. There's an empty lot there now. There's a new brick home there. It used to be Cotton Roberts' house, right there. Boo Roberts' house, one or the other. But the family still lives there, I think, but the lot next door is empty. But underneath the house, they found this brewery vault this guy had built. And it was still intact. It's not anymore because it would have become an attractive nuisance and kids would have gotten hurt or something. But structurally it was still fine. All these years later, it was filled full of silt, but it was still okay. And of course, we were down there digging like crazy to find something. We found absolutely nothing but pounds of sweat and so wet down there. But the lady at the recorder's office, or no, she worked for Chicago Title Company, saw the article in the paper, and she sent me a copy of the lineage of ownership for the property. In 1858 city directory, there was a fellow living there, I'm having a terrible time with names tonight. A German man who was brewmaster at the Bluff City Brewery. It was probably still Yeakel's then, but where Bluff City is now, right down the hill from where he lived. In 1866, in the Garrett Gazetteer that comes out in 1866, it shows him having a brewery on that site, but we had to have the name. His name was Meisner, M-E-I-S-N-E-R. But we had to have a name to be able to go research what these people were doing and when. He opened the brewery in 1866, as close as we can tell, and his gravestone says he died in 1867. So business district. He didn't get to benefit much from it, but he's buried right next door to it, right there at the city cemetery. But you could, like I said, there's a lot of questions sometimes that can be answered. A lot of this research is more about knowing what questions to ask and where to go. That's why these guys here are so valuable. I used to get tons of calls about people and great-grandma because I run the city cemetery, and is my grandmother buried in your cemetery? Well, how do I find out what cemetery is it? Well, they've got books with all that stuff in it. Yeah. This is the map from 1854, and you can see how sparsely the buildings are shown on the map. And you can see how throughout the middle part of the city, right here in the middle, there's just very few structures. There's a lot of them down by the river. There's a lot of them in downtown Alton. The very dark structures are stone buildings. The slightly less dark structures are brick buildings, and light colored structures are frame buildings, so you can distinguish between one and the other. But this is the map that has the property owners' names. Hayden Atwood, the Atwood family owned a lot of property. George T. Brown's name strewn all over everywhere. George T. Brown was a good friend of Lyman Trumbull's. He was a publisher of the Telegraph. It was actually the Courier in 1856, 1857, 1858. They basically took over the Telegraph's operation during that time period. But he was a good friend of Lyman Trumbull's and was very active in the foundation of the Republican Party in Illinois, and was rewarded with a job in the U.S. Senate when Lyman Trumbull got elected. He was the Sergeant at Arms of the United States Senate, and would have been the person who in 1866 walked over to the White House with the impeachment papers for Andrew Johnson. There's a drawing of him on the front page of Harper's Weekly handing the impeachment papers to Andrew Johnson. He's another resident of the city cemetery. His brother, Joseph Brown, also owned several pieces of property. He was a real prominent riverboat pilot. He was mayor. Both of them were mayor of Alton. Matter of fact, most of the people I've mentioned were mayor of Alton. They only served 1 year. So a lot of these guys, they say they're mayor 4 times. They were mayor 4 times for 4 years total. Like Lucas Pfeifenberger, by the time it got to about 1870-something, they started electing for 2 years. So a lot of these guys served more than once, but everybody that was at all involved, there was plenty of opportunity for them to be mayor, because they elected every year. So a lot of these guys had served as mayor. But Joseph Brown was a riverboat pilot who later became mayor of St. Louis. two guys here at Alton that were mayors in St. Louis. Our first mayor was John Crum, who was a lawyer. He was in business with Seth Sawyer here in town. And of course, he was the mayor when Lovejoy was shot, who did a less than adequate job of trying to get the crowd open up. But they didn't have a police force, so it wasn't, they couldn't call out the militia because half the militia was on the other side of the street. So, it was very divided at that time as far as the community is concerned. But he was later mayor of St. Louis. Joseph Brown was mayor of Alton, and then later mayor of St. Louis. Yes, ma'am.
If I remember my history right, Alton was considered to be the capital at one point. Why was it changed to Springfield?
She took it down. Abraham Lincoln. She asked why Alton was not the capital and Springfield was. When the capital was in Vandalia, there was a referendum in about 1843, a statewide referendum as to which community should be the capital of Illinois, and we won the referendum hands down. Well, Lincoln wanted the capital of Springfield, so subsequent to that vote, when he was in the Illinois legislature, he got together with some Springfield guys, and they did this deal. We were to get the railhead, which is ludicrous in and of itself, and I'll explain that in a minute, but we were to get the railhead, and Springfield got the capital. And it did make some sense because of the central location that it's in. And it was on the stage routes, everything went to Springfield. So it was actually easier to get to Springfield than it was to get to Alton in many cases. The national road was supposed to extend from Vandalia either to Alton or to St. Louis, and we were all hoping it'd come to Alton, in which case it would have been all over, would have gone down the river there. But it stopped in Vandalia, didn't get any farther than that. We would never, the reason we didn't, they did this deal, and then there was a financial panic, and railroad construction stopped. So they got the capital, and we got standing there holding the bag, basically. And we still have evidence of our failure because we call it State House Square. We ought to call it Miles Davis Circle or something, because why recognize it? Oops. But that's the reason. Alton would never have been a railhead anyway, because we were in a battle. We're in a hole. Benjamin Godfrey lost the first $1 million building his railroad by the time he got it up on the flat. When he got to the top of the hill, he was broke because of the grade. And the reason that the trains go to the train station out on College Avenue instead of coming down on the riverfront like they used to is they had to go up that hill. And they didn't want anything to do with that. So there's no way that it would have ended here. And in 1867 to 72, James Eaton settled it for everybody. He built this bridge. Yes, sir.
I want to know what was the main stimulus that started downtown Alton.
The main stimulus that started downtown Alton was the river. That most of the trade that occurred, if you notice on this map right here, all those buildings in this area, the dark black buildings are the prison. Everything on this side of that would be from Broadway all the way up to about 5th Street. There were 9 hardware stores in that small area. Now today we think that's nuts. Well, they weren't trading this way. They were trading that way. These boats would stop. They would sell all kinds of stuff to these boats. Again, the harbor wasn't as good, and it's not nearly as big as St. Louis. There's stretches for a couple miles. But that was the primary, that was where the merchandise was going, coming and going, was on the river. And then during the Civil War, it sort of blew up because we were at the end of the rail line. The Chicago and Alton stopped, probably Chicago Sagan then, but it stopped downtown. That was the end of the route. That's the soldiers would disembark down on the levee, they'd get on the packet boats and go south to fight. Same way with commerce. The railroad would come this far, and Benjamin Godfrey started building his railroad in 1840. He started capping that creek bed down there about that time. So there were railroads coming this, but it took a while for him to hit Springfield. It took about 15 years, I think. But eventually there was an operating line between here and Springfield, which then it was extended, of course. It was the Sangamon and Alton, and then it became the Chicago and Alton. So that was, downtown was primarily riverboat trade and the flour milling trade, because there were two great big steam flour mills downtown that employed a lot of people. Initially, the prison was there was a lot of money spent there and spent on that particular institution, because when it was built in 1833, there wasn't quite as much stuff going on as there was later.
Yes, every so often you'll hear like, oh, this house was on the Underground Railroad, or that house was. Do you have any idea about the accurate number of places that were on the Underground Railroad and all?
I know of 7, but there's a couple things you have to be careful about. The Underground Railroad tour always includes Enos Apartments. Enos Apartments was built in 1867. That won't work. But there are caves underneath the street, which were probably used for that purpose. And you've got to remember something about Underground Railroad. Underground means clandestine. It doesn't mean down here. It could be in an attic, it could be in a barn, it could be in the Rock House in the Upper Alton that's across the street. It's still there across the street from College Avenue Presbyterian Church. They hid them in an oven in the basement. There was a house on the Moses Atwood House, which is the corner of Grove and Liberty Street. If you come from Central to Liberty on Grove, you run right into it. Big 3-story. It's a 4-story when you get down below. When I was a kid, the wall of the basement collapsed, and there was a room underneath the front porch, and they actually found blankets still in the room. I mean, what was left of them, but and then there was evidence that there was a tunnel that ran out the side. Now, the tunnel part is where most of the malarkey comes in. You got to remember where we're at and what we're sitting on here. I mean, this is karst, topography. There's caves and limestone under everything here. You're not going to dig tunnels any place. There's a house right off the circle. It may well have been, it was in place during that time period. You turn off the circle on the college, it's about the second one on the left. It's a 2-story federal style building, gray color, I think. That one, they have suggested was used in that. But the lady who owned it says, well, I understood there was a tunnel that moved from here all the way to the river. Well, it's a tough line to get that far. I mean, there's just, you go down about 12 feet, you're going to hit rock no matter where you're at. For instance, go to the old cemetery, and the first valley is basically a sinkhole. That means there's a cave underneath there. So, one of these days, they all might be down there, but it actually fills up when really storms will hit, and then miraculously it just drains. Well, we know where it's going. It's going into that cave below there. So, any other questions? Okay, thanks.